Köszöntöm Önöket az Alapjogokért rendezvényén, ami egy elég kivételes este. Nem tudom, hogy ebben a teremben mikor volt utoljára vendégünk Perúból. Biztos, hogy nem mostanában volt, de olyan, akit Miklósnak hívnak, és abszolút magyar gyökerei is vannak, olyan meg egészen biztosan nem volt. Ettől függetlenül a téma az olyan, ami hiába választ el minket egy óceán, globális jelenség, ezért mindig szembesülünk azzal, amikor dél-amerikai barátainkkal beszélgetünk, hogy ugyanazokat a harcokat vívjuk az óceánnak a két oldalán. Soha nem felejtem el, most emlegettük fel az előbb, amikor megismerkedtem Miklóssal, ez néhány éve volt, amikor a madridi irodánkat alapítottuk, és egy nagy rendezvény volt, Madrid belvárosában egy nagy rendezvénytéren, és természetesen spanyolul történt minden. A spanyol tudásomat, hogyha azóta fejleszteném, akkor már nagyon jól beszélnék spanyolul, de nagyjából ugyanannyi volt, mint most. Tehát elmondtam azt a pár mondatot, amit tudok, és elkezdődött a rendezvény, a spanyol nyelven zajlott, nem volt magyar nyelvű tolmács, úgyhogy gondoltam, hogy minden rendben van, láttam, hogy folynak a dolgok, és kimentem cigarettázni. És ekkor csatlakozott hozzám egy szimpatikus úriember, akivel szóba egyettünk, rájöttünk, hogy nagyon egy húron pendülünk, kérdezte, hogy én mit csinálok, mondtam, hogy én vagyok az egyik szervező, kérdeztem, hogy ő mit csinál, mondta, hogy úgy gondoljak rá, mint Latin Amerika Jordan Petersonjára, csak egy kicsit népszerűbb, tette hozzá szerényen. És most ezek után, hát ebben a pillanatban nem gondoltam volna, hogy eljutunk odáig, hogy kiadjuk Miklósnak a műveit Magyarországon, de nagyon-nagyon-nagyon örülök neki, hogy ezzel egy kitűnő barátság vette kezdetét, és rájöttem, hogy igazából sokkal tartalmasabb gondolatai vannak, mint Jordan Petersonnak, és sokkal jobban megéri őt olvasni, mint Jordan Petersont. A két központi téma, amit a szerzőnk körüljár, az a transzszexualitás és a transzhumanizmus. Mind a kettővel érdemes foglalkozni. Sokszor szoktuk mondani, hogy itt háború van a szomszédban, és mindenáron szeretnénk kimaradni belőle. Talán ez az előttünk álló választás legnagyobb tétje. Ugyanakkor van egy háború, amit nagyon szívesen vívunk már hosszú ideje, ez pedig egy kulturális harc. És mikor megkérdezzük, hogy mi a tét ebben a harcban, akkor általában azt szoktuk mondani, hogy az identitásunk. Mi az az identitás? Merül fel a kérdés. Erre nekem van egy saját hosszú válaszom, amit megpróbálok nagyon röviden elmondani. Az identitás az emberiség kezdete óta, az idők hajnala óta pontosan ugyanabból a 3 lépcsőből áll fel minden individuum, minden egyén esetében. Az első szintjén az identitásnak van az individuum kapcsolata, az ember kapcsolata a transzcendenssel, a második szintén van az individuumok legszűkebb kapcsolata, legyen az mondjuk család, és a harmadik szinten vannak a tágabb körei az egyének együttműködéseinek, legyen akár az egy városállam, egy város vagy egy nemzetállam, attól függ, hogy a történelem melyik pontjain élt az adott ember, akinek az identitását vizsgáljuk. De ezek egymásra épülnek, ezek a lépcsők. Mi a nyugati civilizációban alapvetően keresztény hagyományokból indulunk ki, szoktuk mondani, de hogyha csak hagyományként tekintünk erre, akkor nem értjük meg valójában, hogy mi az az identitás. Mert a keresztény embernek az identitásának az alapja, ez a bizonyos első lépcső, a személyes kapcsolata Istennel, és hogyha ezt elfogadjuk, akkor látjuk, hogy az identitás második 2 lépcsője erre épül. Jelesül a család számunkra azt jelenti, hogy egy férfi és egy nő kapcsolata, de hogyha nincs Isten, az első lépcsőt kivesszük, akkor ez önmagában értelmetlen, hiszen akkor az a mondat, hogy férfinak és nőnek teremtette őket, ez teljesen értelmét veszíti. És itt jön képbe a transzszexualitás, ami láthatóan az identitásnak nem csak a második, hanem az alapjait is igyekszik lebontani, hiszen hogyha nincsen férfi és nő, illetve nincsen teremtés, és nem teremtettünk férfinek vagy nőnek, akkor nincsen semmi értelme az egésznek, akkor nyugodtan felcserélhetjük ezeket a szerepeket, nyugodtan mondhatjuk, hogy nem is csak ez a két szerep van, hanem ez egy tetszőleges skála, de onnantól miért ne lehetne valaki mondjuk zsiráf, vagy elefánt, vagy bármi más tetsző, unikorn is például. Tehát ennyit az identitásról és a transzszexualitásról, de még ennél is érdekesebb és Magyarországon kevésbé taglalt téma. De a panelben, amely utánam következik, a beszélgető partnerek mindegyike jártas ezen a területen, ez a bizonyos transzhumanizmus. Amikor már nem az emberi identitásunk a tét, hanem maga az emberi mi voltunk. És alapvető kérdéseket feszeget ez a dolog, mi teszi az embert emberré. Sokan úgy gondolják, ugye ezt a bizonyos izraeli sztárszerzőt szokták emlegetni, Hararit, akinek amúgy voltak egész jó gondolatai, bár egy antitézise mindannak, amiben mi hiszünk, egy logikus rendszert épített fel. Az ő értelmezésében hamarosan eljön az Isten emberek kora, amikor is a tudomány odáig fejlődik, hogy örök életet és emberfeletti képességeket biztosít az arra érdemeseknek, nyilvánvalóan a kiváltságosoknak. Mi jól tudjuk, keresztény emberek, hogy ez nem más, mint a bibliai Bábel tornya, és biztosak lehetünk benne, hogyha egyszer megbukott ez a projekt, akkor másodjára is meg fog bukni. De a hiten túl, meggyőződésünkön túl jó az, hogyha mi is logikusan le tudjuk vezetni ennek a Harari-féle tézisnek az antitézisét. És meggyőződésem, hogy erre vállalkozik az a könyv, amelyet most magyar nyelven is olvashatnak majd. És nagyon fontos ez az egész harc, mert az első szípeken, tudják, most már jövő hónapban március 21-én az 5-et fogjuk zsinórban megrendezni. A miniszterelnök 12 pontban foglalta össze a sikerreceptet, és az egyik az úgy hangzott, hogy le kell leplezni az ellenfél szándékait. Tehát ebben a munkában harcostársunk nekünk Miklós, nagyon hasznos munkát végezve az óceán mindkét partján, nagyon sokat utazva, és ezért megtiszteltetés nekem, hogy az Alapjogokért Központ által én is részese lehettem ennek a munkának. Úgyhogy nagy szeretettel mutatjuk be azt a könyvet, amely magyarul a gép, amely a bölcsőt ringatja címet kapta, és pont itt Miklóssal beszélgettünk a rendezvény előtt, és mondta, hogy bár nem ez az eredeti címe a könyvnek, de nagyon jónak találja ezt a magyar fordítást, úgyhogy önöknek is ajánlom, hogy forgassák a könyvet. Most pedig az a megtiszteltetés ér engem, hogy a színpadra szólíthatom magát a szerzőt, Miklós Lukacs de Perenyit, illetve Böszörményi Nagy Gergelyt, aki nem csak a Brain Bar alapítója, de a témában Magyarországon kevés jártas szerzőknek az egyike. Itt több művet is publikált. Ők fognak beszélgetni, és aki a beszélgetés moderálja, az Jorge González Gallarza, az Alapjogokért Központ madridi irodájának szenior munkatársa, régi barátom. Úgyhogy kérem, hogy fogadják szeretettel. Szépen köszönöm, hogy eljöttek, megtiszteltek minket ezen az estén, és jó olvasást kívánok a könyvhez.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you, István, for your introductory remarks. And I want to remind everyone that there will be a book signing segment to tonight's event. There is piles of books on the left side of the room, and I wonder if you're going to be able to get to sign all of them. But there is going to be a lot of interest. So again, thank you for coming, Miklós, all the way to Hungary. And for launching the Hungarian edition of this book. And this event, I think, really comes by a lucky accident in the midweek of Davos. And it is a coincidence, but it is midweek Davos. So this really made me think, because when you read a book like Miklós's, which is full of substance, it's full of ideas, it's a very intellectually ambitious book, I couldn't help but look at what is happening right now in Davos in the light of what Miklós says in the book. Because many of the arguments that unfold in this book are crystallizing in Davos at the World Economic Forum. Many of the ideologies, or the ideology that he describes in the book, is being discussed, planned, and maybe even beginning to be executed in these meetings in Davos. So that was a lucky coincidence. And actually, many of the authors that you either quote or mention in the book have been speakers in Davos in the past. Obviously, Klaus Schwab, who's the chairman, but many others. And obviously, István already mentioned this name, Yuval Noah Harari. Actually, yesterday around lunchtime, Yuval Noah Harari was delivering a lecture on the future of AI and humanity. And the title of the talk was An Honest Conversation on the Future of AI and Humanity. And that really puts the dishonesty of the whole thing in context, right? If that's the honest conversation, everything else is what it is. But I want to begin with a question, which is, starting with Miklós, and I'd love to get, sort of a mix of perspectives here. Because in your book, in the personal fragments of your book, you speak of how you came to be interested in transhumanism. You even attended a conference in the UK, Transhumanist Conference, imagine that. You even interviewed David Pearce, one of the leading lights of transhumanism in the UK as well, when you were living there. So I'd like to, starting with you, obviously, Miklós, to tell us what were some of the steps you took, what were the milestones that led you into this topic? Because this has been a 10-year effort. You say in the book that this started in 2016. This is one of the earliest alarms that have been sounded, certainly in the Spanish-speaking world. So what led you here?
Well, thank you very much to the team István and all the team at Alapjogokért for the effort you have made to publish my book. I'm very, very grateful. Just on a personal note, my father is Hungarian, and he is going to turn 87 in a month. And he's extremely proud of what I have accomplished, because he left Hungary in 1944 with my grandparents. So it's a matter, I feel like, a vindication of his name. So I'm very excited and very happy about that. So thank you to all of you for this. Now, on a very quick note, István exaggerated the fact when he said that I told him that I'm the Jordan Peterson of Latin America. He put some spice on that quote. But
Jordan Peterson wishes that.
I told him I am like a Jordan Peterson on a way, way minor scale. That's how I put it. So just in case. And for your question, I was not interested in transhumanism at all. I finished my PhD in 2015. I studied in Manchester, in England, at the University of Manchester. It was a PhD on science and technology, policy and management. So I was more interested on policy issues, science policy, research, and I was working by then at ESAN, which is a school of business. It's one of the good business schools in Latin America. And a colleague of mine forwarded me an email from the World Economic Forum. They were taking the Davos meeting was taking place in 2016, and the topic was the fourth industrial revolution. And what struck me was the definition of this, let's say, this program. It literally said, the fourth industrial revolution is, like pushed by technology. It's the fusion of the biological, technological, and digital spheres. And that really struck me up. It was like, whoa, words have meaning, and put in together, they have even more meaning. So when you talk about biological spheres, you are actually talking about life, not only human, but animal, vegetable life. When you talk about technological sphere, you're talking about chips, hard drives, you're talking about hardware. And when you talk about digital sphere, you're talking about the internet, cloud computing. So it was like an eureka moment. Everything came to my mind, and I just pictured a cyborg. It literally was like that. And I said, this is incredible, because at the beginning it was an intuition, so immediately I became obsessed with the topic. I started reading about it. I started reading about transhumanism, and actually it was, put in other words, transhumanism turned into global public policy. And I think that was the major contribution of my book, was to take transhumanism out from the academic circles, because it was a topic of discussion and research for many years before. But everyone seemed to take it as a, you know, as a club of nerds who are obsessed with becoming Tony Stark, and a group of, you know, people interested in the philosophical underpinnings of this ideology. But it was at that moment where I realized this is not anymore an ivory tower topic. It has become mainstream public policy, you know, arrangements. And you could see this because every government around the world was, you know, implementing fourth industrial revolution policies. And that was becoming quite dangerous. So I said, well, I have to develop an argument. I have to really transform my intuitions into certainties. So I embarked on research for about a year and a half. And by 2018, after going to this Transvision, the 14th Transvision conference in London at Birkbeck College, where all the transhumanists, the most famous transhumanists met, and I was there, and I could listen to their aims and goals, and it was like dystopic. They thought of this future as something wonderful, and when they were talking about, oh, transforming people into robots, that would be so great, or imagine, you know, we don't have to have any more sex, we can have a wonderful set of perfect human beings designed and engineered at labs. And they were truly convinced about this, and I was like, these people are quite, you know, sick. And of course, I didn't tell them sick in the moment, otherwise David Pierce would have never accepted an interview with me. But it gave me a full picture of the subject, and that's when I said, the fourth industrial revolution is not other thing than transhumanism turned into global public policy.
And Gedi, I want to ask you how you came closer to this topic. You also lead Brain Bar, which is a very interesting initiative here in Budapest, for those who don't know about it, and it's also very future-oriented, and it feels like many of the topics we'll cover today would find a home at Brain Bar. So what made you, what got you interested in this? And also, is this a topic in Hungary that is widely discussed?
Good evening. So Brain Bar is a festival on the future. It's an event I used to call a Renaissance platform. So we approach the issues of the world from a holistic direction. That means there are scientists, but also corporate leaders, cultural leaders, also politicians, analysts, teachers, students, a lot of different people with different opinions. And it's also ideologically agnostic. That means we welcome every single potential opinion and second opinion about the world. And of course, transhumanism is something you cannot escape from if you research the current agenda of science, technology, culture. And at the very first Brain Bar, a little more than 10 years ago, we already welcomed a guy of Hungarian origin called Zoltán István, who is one of the most, I would say, prominent, at least the most known transhumanists of the US. He used to be a presidential candidate from the Transhumanist Party. So we welcomed him as one of our speakers for the first event, and then we also had cyborgs and humanoid robots and everything like that. So yeah, we do have some experience. After all those encounters with transhumanists and early versions of humanoid robots and those kind of stuff, honestly, I'm a little less concerned by all this than the author of this book. I see them more funny than terrifying most of the time. And I also see them a little isolated socially and intellectually from most part of society. I also think they are interesting on many levels. So like bugs, you know, you have to dedicate some time to understand their world. It's an interesting universe. Strange things, strange creatures, and according to my experience, most of the time, very strange individual stories behind all of them. So it's a very individualistic stuff. And in most of the cases, they came from, active transhumanists came from very strange personal journeys. I also realized that many of them are coming from Russian origin. an unlikely high percentage of transhumanists are coming from Russian origin. And I tell you why this is so funny. Because it's not funny, it's interesting. So when you think about the Russian vision of life, that's a very unique one. And you can grab the nature of the Russian point of view in the game of Tetris. Tetris is a Russian video game from the early 80s. And you know what's the most unique part of Tetris? You cannot win in it. You can only postpone that. So I think, as an amateur anthropologist, the Russian approach to life is a very defensive one. You always try to escape death. And this is very common with the transhumanist approach. So I think anthropologically, this whole movement, the individuals who are leading it, who are spending most of their money on it, are actually a very interesting part of the crazy part of the society. I also think that even if it's isolated, and even if it's extreme, and even if it's sometimes ridiculous, it's relevant as well. Why? Because I think making the perfect machine, making the machine, is a very old, ancient dream of our species. So it's not a new postmodern stuff. It's not even a progressive thing. Creating the machine is a dream of Homo sapiens since almost the very beginning. I just came through an interesting book published in the 60s. It's called The Medieval Machine, which goes against the perception that the Middle Ages were scientifically pure and backward thinking. The Medieval Machine as a book is about how even medieval monks were very much into creating new machines, from telescopes to the first clocks. So creating mysterious machines are part of how we approach to magic, how we try to become magicians, all of us, many of us, scientists of a certain age, the smartest and the craziest of a certain generation. It's just the way how our species behaves most of the time. And I think we have to approach the whole topic as a from an anthropologic point of view as well, not only from an ideological or political point of view. Why our species are always into creating a machine that is similar to us. Why? Why we are mimicking the creator and creation as a process ourselves. Why it's an endless story of mimicking God. Why? I don't know the answer, but it's a timeless quest of us as a species.
Well, this is. I was going to segue, actually, just to kind of put this in context, because your book really does devote a whole chapter, the first chapter, to the intellectual history of the idea of progress, and to sort of like, add this to Gergely's question. You do. It seems like in that chapter you do acknowledge that this quest for godly powers dates like it really goes far back, millennia. But what's that history like? I mean, when does this postmodern, as you call it, postmodern progressivism, when does it emerge? What are the theoretical foundations that within it that you get into the book? Because this is really, really important for everything else we'll discuss.
Yes, I would just like to quickly add to or complement what Gergely has said, which is absolutely precise. The book is mainly about anthropological change, and there's no political language here. Actually, I make it very clear that this is not a right or left divide. It is human-centered, anthropologically centered. It's the dangers and risks for human ontology, basically. And as you said, transhumanism is a very, very long, late aim of people So when you read, for example, and I write about this in the book, about the Epic of Gilgamesh, you know, he wanted to have eternal life. So humans were already thinking about achieving superhuman capabilities or godlike capabilities. So Frankenstein is also a kind of transhumanism. When, you know, when you sell your soul to Faust, it's also transhumanism. So transhumanist attempts have been always present in human aspirations. Now, as for your question, of course, it's very hard to pinpoint exact moments. This is a history of ideas, basically. But to summarize them, yes, I make a distinction between rational progressivism and postmodern progressivism. And I would like to first define the common one, progressivism. So the first, let's say, organic ideas of progress, more elaborated ideas of progress actually come during the century of Enlightenment, and they are developed, and they put humans at the center of that progress. And it's the belief in human reason that will push humanity towards an endless road of progress. So it was basically faith in human reason. And through faith in human reason, humans would free themselves and actually achieve levels of development that would lead them to perfect themselves. So Turgot, for example, or the Marquis of Condorcet, they were already writing about this in the 18th century. You know, that human beings can become perfectible, that the human mind can become perfectible. So that's, let's say, the basis for rational progressivism, which would be the classical version. Now, with the turn of postmodernism, you have a great change there, because postmodernism is the rejection of reason. It's the rejection in the faith in reason. It basically says there are no universal truths. With the classical progressivism, you had this, you know. There's universal freedoms, universal rights, universal aims, universal ideas. Postmodernism destroys that. And one of the most powerful tools for that deconstruction was actually Jacques Derrida through hermeneutics. He basically, through hermeneutics and his approach to deconstructing texts, so basically there's a position of authority and power that authors have that no one has granted them to exercise, that they try to, let's say, communicate ideas to you from their position of power. So basically it's your responsibility to read in between lines, and you have the right and you have the obligation to get to your own conclusions, not necessarily believe what the author is saying, because his dominant narratives may affect you. So you create your own truth and your own interpretation of things. This is very powerful, because at the beginning, postmodernism was also an attack on arts, on the arts and how the arts were interpreted, but this went beyond this field of, you know, of human activity. And it also reached anthropology. You know, basically it said, well, there's not a single universal human nature. So, of course, this is not proposed necessarily by postmodernists, but this is how it evolves. There's no universal human nature. And there's where you come and see, to make that connection, to current ideology. So, for example, LGBT ideologies, transgender, transracial, transcapable. You know transcapable people, who are they? Transcapable people are people that are born normally. They have no problem. But they decide to, let's say, voluntarily damage themselves. So there's a case which I report in the book, which is, you know, it's properly quoted and referenced, of this woman in the United States, in Michigan, who wanted to become tetraplegic. She wanted to have a surgery so her, how do you say that, her spinal cord to be severed, so she could live forever in a wheelchair. That was her aim. So of course this board denied that request. So she voluntarily put some frames in her legs and she lives 24/7 in this wheelchair. Or another woman who, with the aid of her psychologist, poured acid in her eyes because she wanted to experience the world in darkness. So then you can see, of course you would say these people are, you know, they have psychological problems. Well, if you say now that thing, you can, in some countries, be liable of hate crime. or a hate speech because you are not recognizing that diversity. Of course, these are extreme cases, but then you also have transracial, I don't know, there are many trans categories, you know. And the idea is basically the same. You are not constrained by your biology. You are not constrained by your identity. It's your own truth. It's your own interpretation of yourself. This is why it's the crisis of identity. There's no single identity anymore. You can deconstruct and construct yourself with the help of technology as you wish.
Okay, well, so Gergely was actually getting into something very interesting beforehand, and I think this really kind of creates an issue, to debate, which is, how far is transhumanism really getting? I mean, Gergely, you seem to be confining this to like a sort of a niche, almost like a fancy, almost like a fad. This is a very limited phenomenon that is only espoused by a very limited subset of people. And I really want to get into that, into the evolution of transhumanism. And let's do some history here as well, because your book, Miklós, also, I mean, your whole book seems like an effort to connect many different strands of progressivism, and you do find this philosophy embedded in every single one of them. But it does get, for instance, at the start into environmentalism, which is something that very few people would relate to transhumanism. I found this really, really interesting in Miklós's book. You say that in the 70s, which was the apogee of environmentalism, it seemed like the Earth was the overriding aim. Preserving the Earth was the overriding aim. It was it was the most urgent issue on the agenda for progressives. And then what you seem to say in the book is that actually that was a pretext, that was a shallow pretext for something that goes much deeper, which is not just population control, so we can preserve the Earth, but less people and better people. You do make this argument, which is a very powerful one, I think. So starting with, maybe you can have a start if you'd like. I would like for both of you to weigh in into how does transhumanism constitute a separate thing, and how do you relate it to every other cause within progressivism, to the trans issue, to the ones that you've just outlined before, to wokeism? Are they connected? How are they connected? How is it connected to environmentalism too?
Yeah, well, I mean, what connects all those things, except of environmentalism, which is, I think, a pretty legitimate area of activism, all the rest are connected by the psychological problems you just mentioned. So they are connected because people who are into this kind of stuff are mostly suffering from some kind of psychological problems, according to my experience. There is another thing that is common in their practice, which is they are terrified by the fact of death. So István, when he opened the conversation today, talked about creation, but it's equally important to talk about the role of death. So if there is no death in human life, then there is no responsibility. There is no particular importance of certain acts, doing things or not doing things, doing good, taking care of our loved ones, taking care of our neighborhood, doing good for the society. If there is no that, there is the whole thing disappearing. And so I think the issue of that is something we should include into this agenda very much, and how to think about that. Because, and I think, and of course time, another issue which defines human life since the beginnings of modernity, it also disappears from the picture when transhumanists came in. So I think those people who are actively supporting transhumanist agendas are themselves personally terrified by the perspective of their own death. They are a little childish in that sense, in my opinion. That's what I experienced when I talk to them. So, and that is the reason why I'm a little less serious about the whole topic. But I don't want to relativize that. So, I also think that the technological companies, the technologists, the industrialists of our age are seeing biology as a technology in general. So biology as a technology, something we can approach from a technical perspective. It's not a given thing. It's something you can and you should modify in order to longer life, better life. So that's a fact. You don't have to be a transhumanist. You just have to be a very ambitious biotech entrepreneur to support the general agenda of you mentioned. So I think the larger context is definitely happening, and it's there. I think we have to separate the crazy extreme voices from the very serious industrial build-up that is happening in the biotech field, because these are not necessarily the same people. These are not necessarily the same money and the same perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll go back to the environmental question, but my position that does not place me as a technophobic. I'm not against technology. Actually, I run, a startup. I've just started with artificial intelligence, AI agents development. So I'm not against technology. I'm against the bad use of technology or the bad consequences of the bad use of technology. And it's true that transhumanists are like a small crew of, very particular people. But the movement has gone beyond. Actually, you will find, not with the title of transhumanism implicit in them, but you will find centers that promote transhumanism in academic ways. So for example, at the University of Oxford, the Uehiro Center for Practical Ethics, led by Julian Savulescu, it's a really pro-transhumanist institute. The Future for Humanities Institute, that was also at Oxford University, led by Nick Bostrom, a prominent transhumanist philosopher. It was just recently terminated, but for many, many years it developed academic papers intending to legitimize transhumanism. And you will find these centers at the University of Arizona, at UCLA. You will find them at universities in the UK, in universities in France, in Germany. So these things take time. That's why it's not an immediate change. But the fact that they are small now does not mean that they pose the risk of becoming mainstream. On top of that, you will have to add how mainstream media is constantly bombarding, especially the younger generations, through TV series, through movies, through video games. They are making them think that this is actually normal, that being possibly a cyborg would be something desirable. And of course, there's a generational thing there. So yes, I think we have to not be too concerned now, but we have to pay attention. And the other thing is that big tech companies also play a big role in this one. So for example, Ray Kurzweil, one of the most prominent transhumanist thinkers, he developed the idea of the intelligent explosion, the singularity. He's head of product of Google. So yeah, there's some, this ideology permeates through products. So for example, when you start connecting the dots and you say it's an identity problem, and the idea is to turn human beings into clay, which can be upgraded or enhanced through technology. Well, let's think of some pre- or proto-transhumanisms. Trans surgeries are transhumanism in action. It's someone who thinks that he or she is not he or she, goes to a doctor who will use technology, all the medical devices, to change the human nature of that person, who will not be a she anymore, but become a he. And that also has not only implications in his human or her human nature, but also implications through institutions. So how do we conceive families now with a trans woman and a trans man? Then that's the point. And these are not so lesser cases, these are more frequent cases. The whole LGBTQ ideology, where you can have as many genders as you wish, It's also a way of deconstructing the human being at a conceptual level, but that's a precondition after you deconstruct the concept of human or human nature to transform that human nature, and that transformation of human nature will have strong and massive implications in human institutions, marriage, family, which in turn will have massive consequences at the national level. That's why Hungary is so strong, and this might seem yet here something kind of like a strange thing, because you have very, very strong family policies, and that's wonderful. And your constitution, soon my constitution also, because I'm applying for my Hungarian citizenship again, it makes it very clear, men and women in the constitution. That's something very, very important. People might not think this is important, but this is the crucial aspect. And with this I close. If we redefine human nature and reconfigure it through technology, we might lose our most important asset, which is being humans. And humans are not understanding, especially the younger generations, how imperfectly perfect we are as beings.
I just want to say that it's a hard sell. Regardless of the budget of Google or the University of Oxford, or these very influential, pseudoscientists you mentioned, the idea itself is a hard sell. Especially if you connect it to the LGBTQ and the trans stuff. So, if you see the statistics, we are already left peak trans according to U.S. data. So, I mean, the peak woke period after the first Trump administration, during the Biden administrations, were about, like 40% of US teenage population were somehow into the whole trans thing, and now it's way lower just after a couple of years, because it was just I would say a postmodern capitalistic, it was a product. And by far not an origin, by far not a genuine change in human needs. Mm-hmm. So I do think if I talk to Gen Z people or Gen Alpha, I don't see if genuine needs or the basic human nature are changed. I see they are suffering from many of the things the big tech are actually pushing them to. So I'm a little more optimistic about the general population and their perception of purpose in life, the importance of being human. Mm-hmm. So I do think, once again, it's a hard sell, regardless of the budget.
Yeah. Well, very quickly. It is very true, and thankfully the whole woke, agenda is unpeaking, and it's wonderful. And Gen Z youth has understood or has witnessed the excesses of millennials, and they have said, okay, let's put some brakes here because this is too crazy.
They also rediscovering the transcendent. What
exactly.
István mentioned.
They're going back to church.
So you have to follow the trend lines and not the headlines. So if you take a look at the church attendance among Gen Z people coming back to US, it's especially in conservative churches.
Yes.
It's growing.
Sorry. It is true, and I'm very happy. Myself, I have turned back into religion. I was not very religious, but now I'm going back to my Catholic roots, and I have started reading the Bible again, and I've started understanding different things and meanings, and it's a reconnection to who we are. And very quickly, from a biological perspective, yes. So let's say biotechnologies have these threats of biotechnologies on human nature have lowered, but there's another one, and perhaps we can discuss it even further, which is AI. So through AI, you can also, reach certain levels of deconstruction, which do not necessarily mean immediate change on human beings, but changing their behavior. So for instance, the main problem and risk I see with AI, which is the topic that I think is going to come hot in these years, is how people, especially the young ones, are outsourcing decision-making capabilities and power to algorithms. That's also an early way of, of transiting to this road where humans stop behaving and thinking like humans, and it's another path open to transhumanism. Not necessarily a physical change, but a behavioral change.
Yeah, unlike the trans craze, that doesn't seem anywhere close to tapering off. That seems to be getting worse. But just stepping away from the substance of these ideas, I want to get into the institutions through which they're disseminated. And actually, by the way, on this last exchange, your book really does say that you seek to create new questions, foment new questions, trigger new questions, but there are already so many existing questions that we can't really answer. So this is really, these are really uncertain times. But on the question of institutions, you really have some powerful things to say, because, I mean, you use the term extractivist. You say that global progressivism is a set of extractivist institutions, and you get into the incentives and disincentives that it uses, this network, to promote and to demote certain ideas. I mean, we spoke about Noah Harari, and he really comes in for some bile in your book. He's really harshly criticized, but you use him as the example of, here's someone who wouldn't be where he is if it wasn't because the media enables him. There's this fawning attention. It's like, what's on your mind today, Yuval? Tell us what's on your mind today. So I want to get into the institutions and how do you brave this, the punishment, the exclusion, the marginalization? If you cross a line, you're canceled, you're censored. And your book really has some strong language. You speak of the hyenas of progressivism, and as Gergely said earlier, for you, the proponents of transhumanism are deranged. They are deranged individuals. Is there a higher risk for that today? Do you think that's getting better? Do you think the risk of saying those things is getting lower?
Yes, I would say from that side of the discourse, let's say if we talk about trans ideologies, LGBT, feminism, it has lowered significantly. So I think that's a positive thing. Now what I see is different kinds of suppression right now, but at the institutional level, if you can remember, so for example, you had the World Economic Forum, which is a private organization. It doesn't have, let's say, political mandate or political legitimacy. But even with that, without that legitimacy, they design policy, they design institutions that would be repackaged, and they would be adopted, for example, at the United Nations, or they would be adopted at the European Union, which Hungary has fought so hardly against. And then you would have full legal packages which would be exactly the same. They would be standardized and sent to France, to the UK, to Brazil, to the United States, to Peru, everywhere. And it was like, okay, so where's national sovereignty? Where are our legislators? And then you would see that, surprisingly, in highly Catholic or Christian societies, like in the West, in Peru, for example, where 70% of the country is Catholic, these laws were approved. And of course, you don't have the evidence in front of you necessarily, but you can infer that these organizations have loads of money where they can bribe or they can create different incentives to these people who are the legislators so they could change their mind, because people say, oh, there's nothing illegal. Perhaps there's nothing illegal by hiring an expert in gender studies with a $15,000 salary at the World Bank. It's not illegal, but it's profoundly immoral. So illegality does not take away immorality, and you would have these people in positions of power deciding what the laws of the countries would be. And this is a pattern that was repeated throughout the West and throughout the world, basically. So yeah, you can see the power of these institutions and how national sovereignty has been eroded. I mean, Hungary is one of the few, very, very few countries in the world that has stood very, very strong and firm in this situation. That's why perhaps some of the things I am saying are a little bit alien to you, because you have not experienced them at full scale. But even in my country, in Peru, which is one of the most conservative countries in Latin America, which is one of the countries that has better resisted these agendas, you can still see the infiltration of these movements. And it's something that has created such a social uprising. And as you said, it is going back because people were fed up. I will tell you a very, very small anecdote, a personal anecdote. I do travels through different countries in Latin America, giving speeches about these topics and others. And I was invited to Tuxtla Gutiérrez, which is the capital city of Chiapas state in Mexico, which is one of the poorest states in Mexico. It's where the Army of National Liberation with Comandante Marcos emerged. Very, very poor. And I was talking with two other friends who were touring with me. We were in front of I'm not kidding, a 5,000 people crowd in a baseball stadium in the poorest state of Mexico. And people were very, very, angry because the government was forcing their kids to read literally garbage. So sorry for the examples, but how to, for 10-year-old kids, how to play with your penis, how to enjoy anal sex for 9-year-old kids. And this was material that was distributed by the Ministry of Education of Mexico. And we said, wow, hello, this is like way too much. Kids should not be studying this. Kids should not be reading this garbage. So they asked us, what should we do? And I honestly said, well, once they get the books here, you pile them in a big, big pile, put kerosene, and fire them. I thought it was just taken as something lightly. Well, 2 months later, through Instagram stories, groups of 200 parents burn a pile of books in Chiapas. Whoa. So yeah, that's a direct policy, let's say, It worked so hard that the government agencies did not push anymore, because if it was one family or one individual, they would have crushed that person. But because they were in a crowd, they would do nothing. And they changed the policies in other conservative states in Mexico, and they are not distributing that garbage anymore. So yeah, institutions have a very, very powerful play. But that's when I say families are the first line of defense.
Before we open up for Q&A, I want to turn to Gergely and also get your thoughts on the issue of media and what kind of media ecosystems we can build, intellectual fora like Brain Bar and others. Do you feel like ideas like transhumanism are being unfairly, do you think the playing field is uneven? Do you think they have more influence than they really merit?
No. So I think these are relevant phenomena. It's good that we hear about them. It's good that we see them evolving, because then we can react to them. So it's good that we know about these workshops and institutions. It's actually useful if we see them appearing on globalist media outlets, because then we can form our own strategy. That's one thing. Another thing, I do think that we have every tool we need to form our own approach and build up our own institutions, our own schools of thought, our own networks, intellectual, logistical. So I think, and I do think that it's also crossing party lines and ideological lines. So, for example, coming back to the environmentalism and the ideas you mentioned in your book. So I think coming back to a more organic and closer relation between nature and between people and nature, between man and nature, is something we can share between left and right. Some parts of left and right. It's not necessarily a conservative thing. It's not a liberal thing. Understanding nature, understanding human nature, understanding the nature of things and the nature of creation is not an ideological issue. It should be universal, as God himself is universal. It cannot be an ideological thing. So I think we can form new alliances. That's what I experienced during the last 10 years of Brain Bar. I approached a lot of different people from different political backgrounds, thinking mostly the same when it comes to stepping up against the tyranny of virtual the tyranny of digital, the tyranny of postmodern. So I do think that even if we keep the traditional ideological communities around us, because we need them to strengthen ourselves on many issues, and we differ on a lot of things with liberals, for example, or leftists, there are things in which we can form new alliances, and that is really exciting. And these things you mentioned in your book, these are part of this potential new alliances.
Wonderful. Last few words. No, go ahead, and then
Thank you.
we'll open.
Yeah, I fully align with what you said. Actually, in the book, I don't draw partisan lines, and I would like to exemplify this with another practical case. It was again in Mexico. I was in Morelia, Michoacan. Michoacan is the most hard left-wing, indigenous nationalist state in Mexico. It's a very radical place, a very leftist radical place. And I was giving a conference there, and people knew that I defined myself more right-wing than left-wing. But they were still there listening to me, and I said at some point, I was explaining about the damages of LGBT gender ideologies and how the trans community has been basically, clickbaited to destroy themselves for the benefit of the pharmaceuticals and the surgeons, because once they proceed with the change, nobody remembers them anymore. And so at some point I said, there's something miraculous happening here. It was around a crowd of, I would say, 400 to 500 people. And I said, please raise your hands, those who define or identify as left-wing. Around 2/3, obviously, of the auditorium, lift their hands. And I said, now, without, I hope there's no repercussions here, but all those right-wingers, raise your hands. 1/5 of the auditorium raised their hands. And I said, this is a political miracle. Left and right, sitting, listening to this Peruvian, talk about this. Why? Because when it is about your kids, your family, your values, your faith, it doesn't matter whether you are left or right. It doesn't matter if you read Marx or you read Adam Smith. Nobody cares. Everyone is united in these things because these are universal core human values. So that's a way to put, actually, when you talk about transhumanism, you will see that Francis Fukuyama is against it. Leon Kass is against it. Michael Sandel is against it. Jürgen Habermas is against it. So you will have right, center, left wing, all against this madness. So yeah, it's a way to exemplify it.